ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षादात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वत मज्जतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. In this Friday Atma Vichara session from Ramanacentre for Learning, Bengaluru, we have been reading Bhagavan's Upadesham, meditating on it from the book Ramana Answers, Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a book compiled by our founder President Sri A.R. Natarajanji, wherein he has compiled all the questions put to Bhagavan by various devotees on the subject matter of self-enquiry, Atma Vichara, between 1900 to 1950. And we have been reading from the section 1936 to 1950, and we have reached the 121st question. After meditating on this week's question and answer, and by the grace of Bhagavan, and then we will have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara practice session. Following that, our President, Sarada Akka, would be contemplating on self-enquiry as it has been captured or compiled by Ganapati Muni in Ramana Gita, which is a Sanskrit verses of the same question and answers put by various devotees to Bhagavan, which has been wonderfully compiled in the form of a Gita by Ganapati Muni. And then finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. In the last week's question, the devotee had asked, Hatha Yoga practice are said to banish diseases effectively and are therefore advocated as necessary preliminaries to Gnana Yoga. So somebody who is practicing Gnana Yoga, so the devotee believes that Hatha Yoga practice is necessary. So it's a question or a statement, we can say. Then Bhagavan says, let those who advocate them use them. It has not been the experience here. All diseases would be effectively annihilated by continuous self-enquiry, was the answer. Continuing to that answer by Bhagavan, the devotee asks, what about pranayama? Maharshi's answer is, what about it? While I do not speak about it in terms of the well-known phraseology of Purakam, Rechakam and Kumbhakam and their matras, inhalation, exhalation and retention of birth in units of time, I have said that it can be used. Mind and life breath springs from the same source. If you stop the course of one, you have automatically stepped the course of the other. Control of mind is easier than control of breath. The latter resembles the forcible milking of a cow, and the former the cajoling of the cow by a feed of grass and caressing it by gentle patting its back. I repeat the question and answer. What about pranayama is the question. Bhagavan says, what about it? While I do not speak about it in terms of the well-known phraseology of Purakam, Rechakam and Kumbhakam and their matras, that is inhalation, exhalation and retention of breath in units of time, I have said that it can be used. Mind and life breath springs from the same source. If you stop the course of one, you have automatically stepped the course of the other. Control of mind is easier than control of breath. The latter resembles the forcible milking of a cow, and the former the cajoling of the cow by a feed of grass and caressing it by gently patting its back. In here, Bhagavan, as we know, talks about the Sahaja Pranayama. In fact, all of Bhagavan's teaching is about being natural. What the Ishvara, that supreme intelligence, has already created, there cannot be anything which we can better it. So in Sahaja Pranayama, whenever the mind is very turbulent, Bhagavan has advocated just watching the normal flow of the breath inside and outside will make the mind become peaceful. So Bhagavan is further upholding it, and he is saying that though he will not use the well-known phraseology of Purakam, Rechakam and Kumbhakam, like usually in pranayama, these Purakam, Rechakam and Kumbhakam are controlled in time, 2:4:2 or something like that, is practiced so that the inhalation is done for 2 counts, then the holding is done for another 3 counts, maybe then the Rechakam, the exhaling, is done slowly to 4 counts, and then the emptiness is again held for 2 counts. This is the regular practice of the pranayama. Bhagavan is saying he is not going to explain pranayama in this fashion, but he has said that it can be used. And the way he has said to be advocated us to use is that the natural pranayama that is happening, that is the breath going in, coming out. If one's attention can be brought to what is happening naturally, Bhagavan says, if there is an agitated mind and one is finding very difficult to control it, it is very easy to control by observing the breath, which is naturally happening. So Bhagavan is saying that I have advocated that. Further, Bhagavan, whatever has explained, has been put in italics by Natarajanji. I'll read out that portion. Mind and life breath springs from the same source. If you stop the course of one, you have automatically stepped the course of the other. Control of mind is easier than control of breath. The latter resembles the forcible milking of a cow, and the former the cajoling of the cow by a feed of grass and caressing it by gently patting its back. So here Bhagavan is very clearly saying that the life breath, that is the prana, and the mind is rising from the self. Bhagavan calls the mind as the Vishesha Shakti that rises from the self. Same is in another form called as the prana. They both are two branches of a same stem, we can say. They both spring forth and merge back in from the same source. If we control one, the other could be controlled. That we have seen Bhagavan advocating, that if we watch the breath, we can control the mind. If we can control the mind or keep the mind in peace, then breath also becomes silent or controlled. So here Bhagavan is going on to say, what if it is gushing out? If the mind is gushing out, if the breath is running, that means the outward movement, Bhagavan calls the mind which is outwardly moving towards objects and divisions and life with thoughts. Bhagavan calls it that as the real mind. It's a continuous stream of thought. The mind which is silent, which has no vasanas, no intentions towards outward things, which is relishing at the source. Bhagavan calls it the silent mind, or nothing but the self itself. The self is now in relishing its own self. It is not trying to hold on to a sense of division and move outward, trying to relish it with names and forms, with thoughts. So when it is doing that, then the mind and the breath is going outward. Bhagavan is saying, if you can stop the course of one, the other also will automatically be stepped. That is what we practice when we practice Atma Vichara, or even when we practice Pranayama. We control the one which was rushing out whenever thoughts are coming in, and when we see the thoughts, we inquire, to whom is this? Who am I? And by that, we are bringing the mind which was entertaining itself in the form of thoughts towards an imaginative division that it was continuously creating. Because what is only the one truth. But by names and by forms, by limiting its capabilities or giving certain capabilities, by continuously creating names and forms and divisions and assuming things, meanings and purpose, the mind gushes out. And whenever such thing happens, Bhagavan asks, inquire, to whom is this? The answer will be that it is for me. Further inquire, who am I? And when we try to find out what is that I refer to as I, or where from this I thought is springing within me, then the mind which was gushing out towards thought in the form of thoughts and holding on to objects outward, tries to get back to the source from which it sprang, the I. And in doing so, the mind will be controlled, which will be cajoled. Bhagavan uses here. This is a very gentle way of taking the mind back to the source, as opposed to holding on to the prana, or even holding on to the mind by controlling it. But this is a very simple way of making the mind go back to its source. And by doing this, Bhagavan is saying that it is the most easiest way of controlling the mind or controlling that cow, which instead of rashly beating it up, tying it up, and trying to milk the cow. Why we are milking the cow? Because we want to taste it, we want to enjoy. That means the peace that we are looking for. Why would I use a strong pranayama or a controlling of the breath approach? Because my mind is very agitated. I want to bring it, cool it. I want to keep it peaceful. That is the whole purpose of me doing that. Bhagavan is saying that is like trying to tie up the cow and try to milk it. Whereas trying to take the mind to the source, and by making it go back to the source, it starts to recognize that its source is the peace itself. Therefore, it need not do anything externally so harshly to get peace. Peace is its source. So, by taking the mind back to the source by the way of inquiry, to whom is this thought? Me, who am I? And it is like trying to give it a feed of grass. It is cajoling the cow, making it peaceful by looking at its source. And then that milk which we were trying to extract becomes automatically available. It was always there as a substratum. So there was no need for any harsh approach to do that. That is what Bhagavan is saying here, that the self-enquiry that Bhagavan advocates is making the mind get back to the source from which it sprang and recognizing why is it springing out. By the mind, every time it goes out, it finds out that it was only springing out towards the names and forms to get happiness, to get that peace, to somehow conquer that division that it created and be content that it conquered it. And by that, what did it experience? Now I have conquered, that thought is gone. So it was experiencing the peace of the self, the substratum. So here Bhagavan is saying, why do all that harsh thing? If you get back to the source at every time, it is very clear that there is no need to create a division and then strive to conquer or annihilate it. But on the other hand, one will find that the peace alone is, the natural ananda alone is. And therefore that is the straight way of cajoling the cow and getting the milk out of it, says Bhagavan. So the mind which gets back to the source is nothing but the self, which is at the substratum, which the mind, if it rises and moves outward, that's when it is holding on to thoughts, it's holding on to division. And for what purpose, if one may inquire? It is only to find the peace, only to find the ananda. But instead of going a roundabout way by conquering or annihilating something which it itself imaginatively created, instead of that, if the mind were to diligently inquire, to whom is this? Who am I? It will find that ananda, that supreme adobe that it was searching, is its substratum, is its source itself. And then the mind will remain at the source. So Bhagavan has given us this most direct path of Atma Vichara. By inquiring, why every thought, to whom is this? What is the purpose of it? Or who am I? To whom is this thought? When we inquire, we find out that all that the mind is looking is for the peace. And when it goes back to the source, the I, it finds that it is very much the substratum from which it has sprang. So its very nature is of that of peace. And therefore, the more and more it starts to relish the peace in itself, the less and less it will wander outside looking for it. And therefore, this is the most direct way of experiencing that one truth which alone is. So, with Bhagwan's abundant grace, with which alone we have come to this most direct path for the next 20 minutes, no matter how many thoughts come, no matter whatever is the nature of those thoughts, whether they are a good thought, bad thought, an ugly thought, or even a spiritual thought, if at all we ponder, it is only to experience that thought-free state that we are trying to pursue them. But instead of going out, holding on to thought and building it, if we were to only inquire to whom is this and recognize it is for me, and therefore who am I? What is that I refer to as I? Or where from these thoughts arise within me? If I get back to the source, we find that the thought-free state alone is. With Bhagwan's abundant grace, for the next 20 minutes, let us all practice Atma Vichara. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana. Over to Sarada.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as a self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, manifest as Ramana, we in this part of the satsang are focusing on Bhagavan's answers on various questions by serious seekers in the Ramana Gita, that is codified by Ganapati Muni in 18 chapters as Ramana Gita. And we are now meditating on the 12th chapter, which is called Shakti Vicharaha, power, on the relationship between the power or the movement and the self, which is seen as Achala, the ground, and absolutely without any activity. Now the question arises whether the two are compatible, not compatible, what is the relationship between the two? Bhagavan is repeatedly bringing attention back in all his answers to the fact that there is no difference. Actually, the problem arises when we separate the Shakti from the Sat. Is the noise level a bit much, the background noise? Just give me a minute. I think I should shut the window. I think it should be a little better now once we get going. So now we were on the verse 25. It's a fairly long chapter. Verse 25 goes like this. Sarvopi vyavaharoyam na bhavet shaktimantara na shrishtirnapi vijnanam yadetat triputimayam. Sarvopi vyavaharoyam, all the activities. So he says, na bhavet, cannot happen without Shakti, without power. No activity can happen. Na shrishtihi, creation does not happen without power. Na api vijnanam, even knowing something is an activity, says Bhagavan. Yad etat triputi mayam. Wherever there is the perception of the triad in any manner, the triad being the seer, the seen, and the seeing, the knower, the known, and the knowing. All these are three. So wherever there is presence of the triad, one has to understand there is some power which is enabling this action, which is enabling this movement. The movement is the seeing. When we have the seer and the seen, has to be a movement which connects both of them. If there is no movement, what will be seen? There may be an object sitting right in front of our eyes, but if we do not see it, if there is no sense of seeing it, if there is no sense of even being a seer, then this does not happen. So there is a movement, if a duality is there, which is actually also the triad, which is Trinity, which is three. When there are two, there will be three also. and there will be many. But for understanding purposes, they are broadly classified into three categories, which is in grammar also we find the subject, the object, and the predicate, which connects the two. Here it is called the knower, the known, and the knowing. The three, the triputi. Subject, object, and the action, which connects the two. So, wherever such a connection exists, says Bhagavan, one has to understand there is some power which enables the action to happen. So, is power existent or not existent? It is there, says Bhagavan. But if it is seen as apart from the self, then the problem occurs. So he says, Swarupamashrayattvena Vyaparasargakarmana Namabhyamuchyate Dvabhyam Shakti Reka Parapara Shakti Reka Paratpara. See, all this confusion arises because we are looking at it as two. But they are actually the same power. You can say they have two names. Namabhyam uchyate dvabhyam. They have two names. Which one? Shakti Reka Paratpara. That great Shakti which is Paratpara, which is Para and Apara, that Shakti, that is Eka. But it is known by two names. What are the two names? Swarupam, Ashrayam, which is what? Ashrayam, that is the ground, the basis, the Swarupa. It is known as that also. And it is also known as Vyapara, it is known as movement, it is known as the world, it is known as the power. If we understand that both are the same, then we will not get carried away by the power. Why is Bhagavan telling us all this? That he explains in the next verse, which is verse number 27, which is actually brings us to why Bhagavan has been explaining all this. Lakshanam chalanam yesham shaktestesham tadashrayah yat kinchit paramam vastu vyaktavyam syan narashabha. O Narashabha, see what happens is there are some people who think that movement alone is power. Though they think that chalanam, yesham, those who think that chalanam alone is shakti. When there is movement, it is power. When there is no movement, it is meaningless. It is powerless. Simple being. Of what use is it? Of what use is it? If somebody is simply sitting, we think, oh, they are wasting their time. So, there is an interesting story. He says, to such people, Bhagavan says to such people who think that movement alone is power, we have to tell them, we have to remind them that the supreme reality is the base. We have to remind them about that which is the ground. If you think that movement alone is meaningful, you have to be reminded about the ground, says Bhagavan. It reminds me of one of my favorite stories which was narrated to me by Ganeshan Anna about a Siddha in Kerala. And that Siddha, and he was not doing any work. So the people of his community felt he is wasting time, he is simply sitting. So they told him, you must do some work. So what did he do? In the early morning, He used to take one big boulder which was at the base of a hillock, and him doing this for 1 week. They went crazy. They were saying, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" He said, "You wanted me to do some work, I am doing it. But what is the purpose of this work?" He said, "I do not see any purpose in anything which anyone is doing. So I don't see this to be any different from what anybody else is doing." So, but the mind is such, it thinks there is some power. In fact, whenever anything different happens, we are amazed. Somebody, one of the devotees very sweetly said, because the sun rises every day, people don't think that the sunrise is anything special, that it's a miracle, they don't think. That the sun rises is a miracle, nobody will say that. Nobody is worried. Many people are not worried. They may be liking to go and see one special sunrise in the Arctic or one special sunrise in Kanyakumari on a particular day of the year. That is very special. Or in Agumbe, the sunrise is very special. Or somewhere else, in Agumbe, it would be the sunset. But somewhere else, the sunrise on the eastern coast is very special. So we have to get up early in the morning. Those of us who are not used to it also get up and go and see this sunrise is very amazing. But every day the sun rises. It is not considered to be amazing. So for those of us, says Bhagavan, who are getting carried away by the movement, who are seeing power in the movement, we see power in the movement. What does it mean? We see meaning in thought. It is not that thought is wrong. It is not that thought is bad. It is not that thought is unnecessary. But because we see power in thought, we are unable to be free from thoughts even for a few minutes or a few hours or longer than that. Depends on each one of us. For some of us, maybe we cannot be without thoughts for a few minutes also. For others amongst us, few hours may be possible. But then after that, why do we come back to thought? Because we give to it some value. We feel that it is powerful. We feel it gives meaning to our existence only when we think and we act. So without thinking, without acting, without moving, we do not believe that there is something extraordinary which is there. That's why Bhagavan says, to such of us, we are reminded, look at the self, look at the self, that is the basis, that is the ground, that is the adhara. But actually, if you look at it, the movement is equally there. But because we are carried away, says Bhagavan, to those who regard the movement alone as lakshanam chalanam yesham shaktehe tesham tadashrayah yat kinchit paramam vastu. So there is a great vastu. Such of us are being told. But actually, it does not matter, he says. Tadekam paramam vastu shakti meke prachakshate swarupam kepi vidvamso brahmanye purusham pare. Actually, there is no difference between the movement, the ground. There is only that one self. There is nothing. There is no such division. To see the division is the problem, says Bhagavan. So the learned ones, they just call it by different names. Some people call it the self. Okay. They say vastu. Then some others say, they say swarupam, the self. They say it is shakti. Or some people say it is Purusha, the great one, the supreme one. So these are only the different names. Once one is aware that there is no differentiation, for what purpose will there be the rise of the thought? Only when there is difference, thought arises. Only when there is meaning to, only then there is meaning to movement. If there is no differentiation at all, if there is the undifferentiated self alone is, if one recognizes, why should there be any movement of the mind? Towards what will the mind move? If there is nothing apart from it, towards what will the mind move? Therefore, Bhagavan is telling us all this thought. Something is powerful, something is the ground, someone is the Purusha, someone is the Supreme, then there is that which is not the Supreme. All these differentiations are not necessary because they are just different names given to the same truth. When we understand that, as Bhagavan says in Ekanma Panchakam, that alone is enveloping everything. Even this body is within the self. It is not that self is within the body. However, because we have limited the self to the body, we are being told to look for the source within this limit. Because we feel the presence maximum only within this limit. We feel the presence of the self only within this limit. We do not feel it outside. So, if we have to experience our true nature, we have to get back to the source. But the reality is only one, says Bhagavan. That is what he is telling us over here. And by his grace, in the next session, we will continue with the remaining verses of the 12th chapter, which we have gone through for several classes now, because it consists of some 32, 33 verses. So it's a large chapter, and probably it's a large chapter because, as Bhagavan says, power is so important for us. So he is to come round from different angles and tell us that, yes, it is there, power is there, it cannot be denied. But is it apart from the self? And if it is not apart from the self, what are we worrying about? What are we thinking about? What are we moving towards? Therefore, the great ones emphasize only the self because that includes everything. If they say power is important, what happens? The mind moves. As it is moving. Therefore they say, he says, therefore they say only the self substratum. The power is not apart from it. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Apara Satya Sarirashe Yasyor Mimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami